Daniel Sports Central, we go for our 2022 college football predictions for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, team that went 5-8 overall in the 2021 season. It was a step in the right direction for Rutgers, but all this team being 2022. That's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predict their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with their team trends. Rutgers 5-8 last season. They were 3-3 in their first 6 games, 2-5 in their last 7. So finished out at 5-8 last season. And considering this is a Rutgers team that hadn't gotten above 5 wins since 2014, I mean, this was a step in the right direction for Rutgers, getting up to 5 wins and even getting to a bowl game. They got a bowl game opportunity because Texas A&M had to pull out of their game against Wake Forest. So Rutgers got to play a really talented football team there in Wake Forest in the Gator Bowl to finish out last season. So, I mean, 5-8, still not a very good record, but for Rutgers being a team that's once again been a big bottom feeder in the Big Ten the past few years, there is no doubt. I mean, this is definitely a step once again in the right direction for Rutgers. Beat Temple in Week 1, 61-14. That was a huge win, even though Temple isn't a very good football team. Then they beat Syracuse the next week, 17-7 on the road. Beat a Power 5 opponent there, and even beat Delaware 45-13. So, I mean, September, this team was looking excellent in September. I mean, they played Michigan on the road, went to the Big House, and lost to Michigan, but by 7. This team kept it close against a really good Michigan football team. That team eventually went to the college football playoff and won the Big Ten. So, I mean, September was a solid month. They got blown out to Ohio State and lost to Michigan State 31-13. They also got destroyed by Wisconsin in November 52-3. So, I mean, this team was still very inconsistent last season. I mean, they beat Illinois, and they also beat Indiana 38-3. But of course, the inconsistency was an issue. They got shut out to Penn State the very next week after beating up Indiana, and also got blown out by Maryland to finish out the regular season. And of course, in the Gator Bowl, honestly, Rutgers stood a chance in the matchup, I thought. I mean, talent-wise, obviously Wake Forest was the better team last season, but in the end, it just didn't work out for them. They lost the game 38-10. But once again, good opportunity for this team to get to a bowl game last season. But that said, let's look forward to 2022. Now, your roster preview going into next season. This team does have several big changes, a couple of big ones for sure that are going to be significant for this team next season. Of course, you got Noah Vedral coming back, the starting quarterback, who, I mean, he was decent last season. Nothing too outstanding out of him. 1,800 yards, 7 touchdowns, 7 picks, and a 60% completion rate. So, I mean, not outstanding stats, even though he's still a young quarterback, so he's still got potential. He also rushed for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns last season. So, I mean, he can rush the ball too, which is a good thing. And this is going to be actually his 6th season of college football coming up here. He's gone from UCF to Nebraska to Rutgers, and this will be his 3rd season with the Scarlet Knights. So, we'll see how he's improved over the course of the offseason, and if he's better and he puts up a great season, or at least a good season, this Rutgers team could be bound for 6+ wins in 2022. Look at the backfield. You do lose your top there in Isaiah Pacheco, who last season put up nearly 700 yards and 5 touchdowns. So obviously that's a challenging loss. But I'm not too concerned about the backfield. There's some good depth there in the backfield. Of course, you got your 2nd and 3rd running backs coming back, and don't forget Noah Vedral also can rush the ball a decent amount. So I'm not too concerned about the rushing game for this team. The receiving core, you lose Bo Melton, your top receiver, who put up 600 yards last season, 3 touchdowns. So you lose him, but you bring back Shameen Jones and Aaron Cruikshank. So that's good news for this team. There's a decent amount of depth in the receiving core as well. So I'm not too concerned about the skill players' positions. Obviously, Noah Vedral improving is going to be huge. If he can be better next season, I mean, 2020 and 2021 were kind of underwhelming seasons for him. His ceiling is still, I would say, decently high. He's still got some potential here. I mean, if he can improve and have a good season, once again, that's going to go a long way. You lose 1 on the offensive line, 3 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 2 in the secondary. So defensively, this team loses a lot of their players. I mean, 7 players, 7 starters from last season are not going to be around. So that does concern me a bit going into next season, seeing the lack of depth in some positions on defense. But offensively, this team should be improved going into next season, which is very much needed. Brings up the question, chances at improvement in 2022. Will this team reach 6 wins next season? There's a chance. I'm just going to say that. There's a chance that happens, even though it's not terribly high. I mean, you're still in the Big Ten. You're still in the 2nd best conference in football and arguably the best. And so, I mean, for Rutgers here, it's going to be a challenge, and I feel like this team has got potential to do so. This is the best. 2021 was their best season since 2014. So if they can build on the 2021 season, which is a possibility, once again, there is chance for improvement for this team going into 2022 here. But your transfer portal and recruiting now, this team does lose a few players in the transfer portal. Harris, edge rusher, he is coming in from Texas A&M, so you bring in a couple players as well. You also bring in Taj Harris, a receiver from Syracuse, Sean Ryan, a receiver from West Virginia. So the receiving core adds even more depth there. You bring in Curtis Dunlap, Minnesota offensive lineman, and a couple of other offensive linemen here, Willie Taylor from Louisiana Monroe, and also Dorenzo. And as for players that are taken off, you lose Kroma, defensive lineman, and Onyechi, an edge rusher who's off to Colorado State. So really nothing too active in the transfer portal for Rutgers, and recruiting-wise, not terrible. 36th in the nation, 8th in the Big Ten. That puts you in the second half of the Big Ten barely, but still, I mean, for Rutgers, that's, I'd say, a pretty good recruiting class coming in here. You got 5 4-stars and 13 3-stars, so things are looking up here for Rutgers going into 2022. I mean, recruiting-wise, things look good. Offensively, this team shows potential. Defensively, there's a couple of question marks there, but I mean, this Rutgers team shows potential, and I'd say this team is, I mean, they're rising up right now. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to win a Big Ten title in the next few years, but I'm saying this team could potentially, I mean, we could see this team in the ballpark of 7-8 wins potentially in a couple of years here, looking at the recruiting and also, I mean, how this team is improving. But let's look at your schedule now going into next season. You got Boston College in week 1, a road game to start off the season there. Then you got Wagner in week 2, Temple on the road in week 3, and then Iowa comes to town to start off your conference schedule to finish out September. In October, you got Ohio State on the road. You host Nebraska on a Friday night, Indiana at home, and then Minnesota on the road. And then in November, you got Michigan at home, Michigan State on the road, Penn State at home, and then Maryland on the road to finish out the season. So, I mean, it's a semi-challenging schedule. Your crossover games into the West Division include Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. All 3 teams I do expect to be in the top 4 of the Big Ten West next season. So, I mean, it is a challenging schedule. Boston College on the road is one of your non-conference games. You also have to play at Temple, even though Temple is a beatable team. So it's an interesting schedule. I mean, especially having 2 of your 3 non-conference games on the road. But looking at September here, Boston College, I do think you beat Boston College there. And that's a game that I think if you can win that, I mean, Boston College next season, I could see 6 to 8 wins in the ACC. That is a really good win there for Rutgers to start off the season. Wagner, Temple, I think you take care of both teams there. So you beat Wagner by 3-4 touchdowns plus. Temple, you beat them by a couple. And then Iowa comes to town, which is a beatable team. You could beat Iowa there in week 4, and that's a game that I don't think the Hawkeyes want to sleep on. But in the end, you do lose that game in a close one, probably a 3 or 7 point loss. But it'll be close. You're 3-1 heading into October. October is a challenging month at times. I do think you lose to Ohio State and Nebraska. Even though that Nebraska game on a Friday, I could see a potential upset happening there. I could see Rutgers beating Nebraska. Potentially the Huskers just come out slow and Rutgers takes advantage of it. I could definitely see that happening there. So that's a very winnable game, even though I still am going to pick Nebraska. I do think you beat Indiana, though, after your bye week, and then Minnesota on the road. Minnesota next season, I could see 8 to 9 wins, potentially towards the top of that Big Ten West. So I do think you lose to Minnesota there, even though, once again, potentially winnable matchup. So you're 4-4 heading into November. November is probably the toughest month on your schedule, and I do think you end up losing all 4 of these games. You're Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, and Maryland. I mean, Maryland's your most winnable game out of the 4, and that's on the road. And I think the Terps just pick up a game there, and they do end up winning that. But Penn State, you got them at home. Penn State's more beatable than Michigan. Potentially, you pull an upset on them. It could happen, but I'm not going to say so. Michigan State on the road, I just don't think that's going to happen. In Michigan, of course, I could see once again making a run for that Big Ten title and maybe even another college football playoff appearance. So I've got 4-8 for Rutgers next season. Once again, the schedule is challenging for this team next season, even though the talent that I see, I think this Rutgers team could definitely get to 6 wins, but I'm not going to pick this team to get to 6. I do think 4-8 for Rutgers next season. I mean, the potential's there. Defensively, there's a couple of question marks once again. But this team, I mean, I think this team is capable of doing great things in the future. And once again, we talked about the recruiting, and the recruiting is looking good for this team going into 2022. I mean, you build on that. I mean, you build off the 2021 season. This Rutgers team could be, I mean, a 7 or 8 plus win team potentially in, say, a couple of years from now. So it's something to keep an eye on. And Rutgers is a team that I am keeping an eye on going to next season. But once again, 4-8 is my record prediction. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Rutgers, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.